What construction? Moshe.
And Moses.
Disjunctive background information. Now Moses, what kind of participle is this? Haya ro'eh, that kind of construction with a to be verb. What do we call that? Periphrastic participle. Good. With haya plus, or with a participle plus a to be verb. Now Moses was tending. What's the distinction between the ongoing action of the participle and the ongoing action of a imperfect? Remember that distinction? A participle is, how do we draw that on the board? Participle is a solid line of ongoing action, kind of has that feel to it, ongoing, continuous. And an imperfect tends to be episodic, so, or habitual, repetitive, so a series of dots with an arrow or dashes with an arrow. All right, now Moses was tending et zone, the flock of Yitro, his Kohain, his father-in-law, the Kohain Midian, the priest of Midian. And now we get our first Vav consecutive imperfect. Here's our first action in this story. And he drove, or led, the flock behind, or to the backside, or to the west of the Midbar. And he came, what's the verbal root from Vayavo? Or Vayavi, from bow. And he came to the mountain of God, or possibly, if we read that as a hifil with that hirik, and he brought it, the flock, to the mountain of God, to Horeb, Horeba. What did we talk about with El Har HaElohim and Horeba? Talked about directional hay on Horeba. And how is direction indicated in the first phrase? Preposition El, right? So two different ways of indicating direction. El, Har HaElohim, and Horeva. I can use preposition to, or I can use directive hey, or we also then talked about a third way that Hebrew can indicate direction or place. And that is what? It's not used here in this verse. But what is the third way that Hebrew can indicate direction or place? Adverbial accusatives. Adverbial accusatives. And adverbial accusatives are simply a noun of place sitting there without a directional hey or without a preposition on the front. How do I know that they're functioning as in terms of direction or location? How do I know they have this adverbial function if they're just nouns?
Directive hey?
Well, if they don't have directive hey. See, an adverbial accusative of place won't have a directive hey or a preposition. It's just going to be the noun sitting there. Remember how I identify it as an adverbial accusative? Process of elimination. So it's a noun that's not a subject noun, not a direct object, and not the object of a preposition. It's just sitting there as a noun, and I can't make it do any of those other things. What's going on with this noun? It must be indicating location or direction or something like that. In English, I'm probably going to have to give it a preposition. So in English, the point is, this verse could end just with Horeb, with no directional hey. And Hebrew would be perfectly happy to do that, and you would translate it as if there were a directional hey. You'd just say, to Horeb. And when someone said, wait a second, you can't translate that as to Horeb, there's no preposition there, those are no directional hey, you would say, I'm so happy you pointed that out, because this is an adverbial accusative of place. And then your mom will call you on the telephone and tell you how proud she is of you and all that kind of stuff.
So
all right.
This is an adverbial accusative?
This is not an adverbial accusative of place. This is just a noun with a directive hey or directional hey. But I want you to have those three things in your head. How can Hebrew indicate place and direction? With a preposition, with a directive hey, or just with a noun sitting there as an adverbial accusative. All right, verse 2. And the angel of Yahweh appeared. What conjugation is that first verb there? Nifal. So the nifal of ra'ah is to appear. And later we're going to have the call of ra'ah. Did I say yara? The nifal of ra'ah is to appear, and the call of ra'ah is to see. So we're going to have Moses doing that, right? And the angel of the Lord appeared, Elav. What's Elav again? To him. That's just L plus the third masculine singular suffix. You have to get used to seeing that. It takes that type 2 third masculine singular suffix that has the extra yod in it. Av. It's like Ive or something like that. Belabat. Notice the construct ending on labat, feminine singular construct, that patak tav. So in a flame of fire, aish, mitok asana, from the midst of the bush, or out of the midst of the bush. What's the dictionary form of the word tok here? Dictionary form of tok. It's a 2-syllable word, remember? Tavek. Tavek. But you're almost going to always see it shrunk like this because it's construct with what comes after. Midst of. Here, mitok, from the midst of, or out of the midst of, hasanet, the bush. And we get our next verb. And he saw, or maybe in this case, in this context, and he saw, and behold, the bush was burning with fire. How else might we translate ra'ah here besides saw? Looked. What's the difference between looked and saw?
He's not doing it. Actively engaged in it.
Okay, yeah, one has more of an emphasis on the action, right? The action of this. The other has more of an emphasis on the what's actually perceived and saw. In this case, it's focusing on the fact that he goes like this. And Moses looked, and behold. So introducing behold here, probably better, and he looked, and behold, hasaneh, bo'er, ba'esh. And the bush, and bo'er. Josh, what kind of a form is bo'er there?
That would be... participle?
Yeah. Just a call participle from ba'ar. Ba'ar means to burn.
Right.
So this is what use of the participle then?
This would be
attributive, predicate, substantive. Well, how would you translate that clause in English? And behold,
the bush burned.
Yeah, the bush was burning, right? Participle, ongoing action. The bush was burning with fire. What kind of a translation is that? Is it a predicate participle where we're actually making a sentence out of it? The bush was burning with fire? Yeah. Bush was burning with fire. Predicate participle. There's no, and you can recognize it because there's no definite article on the participle. If I wanted that to be an attributive participle, just describing the bush, and behold, the burning bush with fire. No verb. And behold, the burning bush. Then it would have hey on the participle bo'er, and it would be attributive. But here it's just a predicate itself. It actually says what the bush was doing. The bush was bo'ering, ba'esh, with fire. That's a little, actually, tough of a category to maybe put your hands on. It's not location, right? It's not at fire. What is it? What use of base is this? With fire. I'm actually wondering myself as I'm standing here how I would categorize that. It's a lot like what? If you had to just guess, what's that? Yeah, instrument or means, and the bush was burning by means of fire? Kind of, yeah. We're not real comfortable with that, are we? We look through Arnold and Choi, what might we find for that? Let's just give it a shot. Bait in Arnold and Choi. It's not spatial, it's not temporal, it doesn't have anything to do with time. It's sort of not instrumental. The bush was burning fierily. Sort of manner, okay? It actually probably falls under, if you look under Arnold and Choi's explanation of instrumental, they actually tuck another little use into their explanation of instrumental. Halfway through, on page 104, it says, similar to this use, the instrumental use by means of, is the bait of material, which indicates the material with which something is made or formed. And a goldsmith overspreads it with gold. With gold, a bait of material. Well, it's sort of that. It's the stuff with which the bush is burning. This gets into all kinds of philosophical questions. What did the Hebrews think fire was? How did they conceive of it materially, or chemically, or philosophically, or whatever? And I don't know what the answer to that question is. But we're just going to say something like a bait of means or a bait of material. The bush was burning with fire. All right, the next clause, v'hasaneh. Adam, what do I want to notice about the first word of this last clause there? Third to last word of the verse, v'hasaneh, and the bush.
It is a disjunctive vav?
Good, disjunctive vav at the beginning of the clause there. Vav at the beginning of the clause on a non-verb. And here, are we getting background information? Probably not. Contrast, right? Contrast. The bush was burning, but the bush, and it's the same subject, so it's not an emphatic change of subject, it's just, there's a contrast here. The bush was burning, but, and then this is what we stopped talking about last time, this einenu ukal. Einenu ukal. What is einenu doing here? It's a negator. Good. And what kind of a word does ain negate? Here in this case it's ukal, but what category of word does ain negate in the Hebrew language? A certain kind of verbal element. Participles. Ain negates participles. This does not look like a participle, however. It looks like a pual perfect. Okay, if you just looked at that form and went to your Bartel grammar, you'd say this is a pual perfect. And we just touched on this a little bit last time. You don't need to remember this long term. You should remember it for this text to explain what's going on in this verse. But the deal with some of these pual forms in Hebrew is that we think, anyway, that the Masoretes have pointed as puals some words in the text that actually used to be call passive participles. Call passive participles. And so if you look up on a computer program or something and Bible software stuff and you put your cursor over this word and it parses it for you, it's probably going to parse it as a call passive participle. Or it might even say pual in form, probably call passive participle or something like that. Again, why do we think it's a participle and not a pual perfect? Because it's negated with ain, and Hebrew negates participles with ain. What else is there in that? What else is there in the form of ain? It's not just ain, but it's ainenu. Ainenu. What is that enu on the end? What's it indicating?
It's the he, she, it. I can never think of the
Yeah, it's a pronoun suffix indicating, in this case, he or it, right? Third masculine singular. It looks like first common plural. This is that goofy ending, and just to kind of pause on it for a second to give you a chance to let this sink in a little more. This enu ending, usually with an accent there. Is there even a dagesh in the nun? Is there a dagesh in that last nun, doubled nun? That enu ending can be first common plural we, right? That if you have your basic chart in your mind, you think of that as a we ending. But it can also be in this enu form with the doubled nun, third masculine singular, and the deal is this. It's like it tried to be en who. En who. Enu. That who ending, do you recognize that as third masculine singular? A who ending? It's a little bit like the pronoun he or it, right? Who, this. Who. Well, it wanted to be en who, but it just doesn't sound that way as you say it over many generations, and it just becomes enu, 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 enu. It became identical with this. So if it were that, it'd be easy to recognize it's not that, and it's common in the language to see. Get rid of that as best we can. It's common in the language to see this, and it's actually more common as third masculine singular, you can imagine, than as first common plural, because as Hebrew tells stories about people and events, third masculine singular things are more common than speaking in the first common plural. So this says, there is not, particle of non-existence, there is not him or it, and then a call passive participle of akal. Akal, just as an active participle, would mean is akal. Burning. Not burn. Burning. Not burning. Consume or eat. Literally, akal means to eat, right? But it can also mean to consume. So now make it passive. There was not it, and the it here, the third masculine singular, is referring to the bush. But the bush, there was not it being eaten, being consumed. The bush was burning, but the bush, there was not it being consumed. How would we say that in English? The bush was burning, but
the bush was not consumed.
But the bush was not consumed, or was not being consumed. But do you see how the different elements are working there with this ain? And again, that ukal form is just nasty, because it does not look like what it probably is. Looks like a pool. All right, let's move on. Verse 3. Now we're going to move a little faster. Vayomer Moshe. Easy 2 words. It means, and Moses said, Asurana v'er'eh et hamar'eh hagadol hazeh. Stop there at the Atnak. Nick.
Yes.
Translate that for us, please.
The Atnak to the...
Just verse 3 up to the hazeh.
Okay. And Moses said, I will turn to the side and see this great sight.
Okay, good. What's going on with the verbs here? And Moses said, and this is what he says, Asurah. Nick, what kind of a form is that? Asurah na.
That's column perfect, first common singular cohortative of sur, turn aside.
Good. It's from the Halarat sur, to turn, or turn
Could
aside.
you do that all again? Because I did not get
Yeah, a
this
little
all.
faster, a little louder. I mean, a little slower, a little louder. A little faster.
Kal, imperfect, first common singular cohortative of sur, which is turn aside.
Sur, with
Sur.
the shurik in the middle.
Sure.
Halarat. Okay, how am I going to recognize that as a cohortative? There's a big clue here for me. What's my clue that this might be cohortative? Now, it's got a cohortative ah on the end of it. That's part of it. But what else is even more striking here? What's that little word after it? Na. You guys remember that guy?
I pray.
It's I pray or please, or it's that word that we really don't know how to translate necessarily. it comes after imperatives usually. Comes after imperatives like Hosanna in the highest. Hoshana. Hosha is the Hiphial imperative of Yasha, save. Na. Hoshana. Save please. Save now. Save really. It gives some kind of a urgency or a politeness or a pleading to the imperative usually. But here, it's not used with an imperative, it's used with a cohortative. But a cohortative is in the same family as imperatives, right? These are volatives. They express will. So this is not just a bare statement. And Moses said, kind of in a detached, objective way, allow me now to describe what I will do this afternoon. I will turn aside. That's not what's going on. He's not just saying, I will turn aside in a kind of a declarative, informational way. What's he saying with this cohortative and the na on the end? It's self-instruction, self-deliberation, self-commitment. Do you hear the difference in tone between I will turn aside and let me now turn aside or something like that? I shall turn aside. It's a deliberation and expression of will, this cohortative here. So we wouldn't necessarily say in English, let me turn aside, but we could. That'd be a fine translation, let me turn aside. It could also just be translated, I shall turn aside or I will turn aside. But it's a statement of deliberative purpose. So it's not just I will turn aside, it's I will turn aside and I will have a vav, simple vav on an imperfect here. Everybody notice that on the er here. The verb is ra'ah, right? You see all three root letters. It's first person common singular. I will turn aside. But notice the vowel under the vav on er. Everybody see that? What is the vowel under the vav? It's just a schwa. The er. What is this form? The er. What is it not? It's not a vav consecutive imperfect, right? It's not and I turned aside, vav consecutive imperfect. It's simple vav plus the imperfect. And if you were to describe the form of this, that's how I would want you to describe it. Simple vav plus the imperfect. It's not a vav consecutive imperfect, but there is a vav here. Simple vav, this is something worth remembering. Simple vav plus the imperfect is the common Hebrew way of expressing the intended result of an imperative, usually. Simple vav plus the imperfect is used to express intended result. Now, what do we mean by intended result? Well, we just had an imperative, which is an expression of will. So if I say, study hard so that you may learn Hebrew. Study hard so that you may learn Hebrew. I've given an imperative, study hard, and expressed the intended result of that imperative, so that you may learn Hebrew. In Hebrew, I would say, study hard, imperative, and then I use and an imperfect. And you will learn Hebrew is what it kind of looks like grammatically, but it actually bears the clear nuance to the Hebrew ear after an imperative. Intended result after an imperative. Do we have an imperative before this in this context?
Yeah, cohortative.
Cohortative, right. So it's not exactly an imperative, but it's the same family. We call these things volatives. What are the three volatives? Imperatives, cohortatives, and jussives in the third person. They're things that express will, the will of the speaker. Let me turn aside so that I may see this great sight. So in English, we're going to translate this as so that I may see. because it is a simple vav plus imperfect after an imperative. This is actually in Bartelt, chapter 24, but I know when you race through Hebrew in 10 weeks, you don't spend a whole lot of time probably on Bartelt chapter 24. So this idea of the simple vav and its function after imperatives. All right, Moses said, let me turn aside so that I may see. What's he want to see? Direct object, mar'eh hagadol hazeh. And notice this attributive construction here. The sight, the great one, attributive adjective from gadol, the this one, hazeh. This great sight. What verbal root is mar'eh constructed from? Sight? Yeah, from ra'ah. Everybody see that? This sight, this great sight, is a noun form from ra'ah, and Hebrew loves to do this with three-letter roots. How do you make a noun? If you want to make a noun in Hebrew, you just take a verbal action. Have we talked about this? Take a verbal action like shafat. What's shafat mean?
Judge.
To judge. Stick a name on the front of that. What have I got?
The judge.
Mishpat. Mishpat. Justice. Let's see. I think I'm going to do some dwelling, shakan. I think I'll do a little dwelling. I need something to dwell in. A mishkan, tabernacle. Okay? Or, holiness is a good thing. And to be holy is kadash, holiness, kodesh. What about a holy place if I need a sanctuary? A mikdash. So I just add a tav on the front of a three-letter root, and I get a noun. Very common way of building things in Hebrew. So, what's one of the longest entries in your Hebrew lexicon? What letter, do you suppose? Mem. Why are there so many mem entries in Hebrew? Because there's so many nouns that are built off three-letter roots with the mem stuck on the front. There's one other letter that's also used in the same way. Stick on the front of a three-letter word to make a noun. Any guesses? It's less common, but also does it. Let's see. It's tav. Tav. So kavah means to wait, to expect, to hope. Tikveh is a noun that means, what do you suppose? Hope.
So that's like Torah, T plus Ra'ah.
Yeah. Yep. Torah is the same thing, except for in this case, it's from a first yod root that means to instruct, yara. And when it goes to this form, sometimes yods at the front of words like this, when they switch forms, become a vav. Torah.
Doesn't that also mean to be afraid? Yara?
That's with a aleph on the end. Yareh with an aleph. I know, everything starts to run together. Okay, let's keep moving. Where did I do with my Bible? I need a Bible. Give me a Bible. All right. Let me see this great sight, Madua. And notice here the ascendaton. There's no vav here on the front of Madua. It's just Madua. Now that's common with interrogatives like this. Interrogatives like to begin a clause themselves. Madua just means what?
Wherefore.
Wherefore or why. Mm-hmm. What's the deal here? Question mark. Why lo yiv'ar hasana? Why not burns the bush? Why doesn't the bush burn? Now, the imperfect yiv'ar here, default translation for an imperfect is future, but very often in Hebrew, you'll also use an imperfect just with a present tense translation. Why doesn't the bush burn? Why the bush does not burn. All right, quick question. In verse 2, we saw that, behold, the bush boer by H. The bush was ba'aring with fire. And now Moses says here, let me turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush does not burn. They're both ba'ar. Do we have a biblical contradiction here? The bush is burning. The bush is not burning. What's going on? Same word. It's the very definition of a contradiction. If A is true, then not A cannot be true, right? Or one or the other, not both.
Maybe he got closer and he saw his things he was mistaken. Maybe just light was emanating from it. It looked like fire.
Oh, so maybe he gets up, let me turn aside and see this great sight. Oh, I guess the bush isn't burning. No, I don't think that's it.
All right.
There's a different explanation. Yeah.
It can be consumed too, right?
To burn. Yeah. So it's really two different senses of the very same word. But just notice how flexible language is here and how much nuance there is to language. The bush is burning with fire. But Moses, what he's remarking on is the fact that it's not burning up. It's not being consumed. In other words, ba'ar in the first case is just that it's burning. Then we're told it's not being the passive of akal. It's not being consumed. And Moses expresses that same thought. Why the bush is not, and he could have said being consumed. He could have used the passive of akal again, but instead he uses just ba'ar. And how do I know that it means one thing the first time and it means something else the second time? Context. Context.
Is there a reason why you wouldn't use a call again?
He could have very easily. Let me see this great sight. Why the bush is not being consumed would have meant the same thing. But that's the thing about language. There's always lots of different ways to say what could be said. All right. Here's the deal. We're only on verse 4 for next. Starting at verse 4 for next time.
We're a little closer to 8.
What we're going to do next.